Welcome to Roots of Fear. The most terrifying prayers aren't spoken. They're sculpted by innocent hands. Today's story is about the God of Little Horrors. The rain in the city was a perpetual, grimy drizzle, a fitting shroud for Father Anselm's existence. His world had shrunk to the four walls of a dusty, book-crammed study in a forgotten wing of a bustling urban rectory. The air smelled of old paper, decaying leather, and the faint, metallic tang of regret. Once, he had been a rising star, not in parishes or pulpits, but in the Vatican's most shadowy and scholarly department, the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum, the repository for documents concerning phenomena that defied canonical explanation. His specialty was pareitheology, the study of forgotten, minor, and demoted deities, the divine and infernal refuse of conquered cultures and faded faiths. He believed that most evil attributed to demons was, in fact, the work of these hungry, residual entities, feeding on the psychic energy of mankind long after their last altar had crumbled. It was a theory that had cost him his standing. His final, catastrophic failure, a case in a small Italian village where a young girl named Sophia had been diagnosed with a rare degenerative illness, but which Anselm, in his pride, had insisted was a psychic infestation by a pre-Roman larva, a household god turned malignant, had proven him not just wrong, but dangerously so. The girl died during a botched ritual of his own design, and the official diagnosis remained a tragic, natural disease. He was not defrocked, but he was exiled, left to rot with his theories and his ghosts. He stared at the photograph on his desk, its edges curled and yellowed. Sophia's smiling face was a permanent nail in the coffin of his faith, not in God, perhaps, but in his own ability to discern anything at all. The ping of an email was an intrusion. He almost deleted it unread, but the subject line caught his eye, urgent. Your expertise required, Havenhurst. The body of the email was from an Elara Vance, identifying herself as the schoolteacher in the isolated village of Havenhurst. She wrote with a desperate, clinical precision. The children here are creating things. Effigies, from river clay and sticks and hair. They are disturbingly accurate. And the people they represent are dying, Father. In ways that mirror that play. A man with a clay figure missing a leg was crushed by a falling tractor. A woman with a clay figure with its head caved in was found at the bottom of a quarry. The local authorities call it coincidence, a macabre series of accidents. I have read your paper on chthonic deities of hearth and hearthstone. This feels familiar. Please, we have no one else to turn to. Attached were photographs. Anselm's blood ran cold. They were not the crude lump figures of a child's imagination. They were unnervingly detailed. One, a likeness of a burly man, had a leg meticulously snapped off, the break filled with what looked like red berry juice. Another, a woman's form, had its head carefully crushed by a smooth, flat stone. The artistry was chilling. But it was the third photo that held him captive. It showed a collection of these figures arranged in a circle, and in the center was a larger, more abstract form, a twisted, multi-limbed shape that seemed to be made of thorns, mud, and shattered glass. It was an idol. And his trained eye recognized the pattern, a faint, terrible echo from the deepest, darkest shelves of the Archivum. This was no coincidence. This was a feeding. Playtime is the most dangerous time of day. Havenhurst was a place time had politely decided to bypass. Nestled in a deep, mist-shrouded valley, it was a collection of stone cottages, a single pub, a small church, and a schoolhouse, all connected by winding, cobbled lanes. The beauty was undeniable, but it was a beauty that felt watchful, oppressive. Anselm noticed it the moment his old car coughed its way into the village square, the silence. There were no birds. No dogs barked. The only sound was the whisper of the wind through the pines that crowded the valley slopes like a besieging army. Ilara Vance met him at the schoolhouse. She was in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held a deep, weary fear. She was pragmatic, no nonsense, but the foundation of her rationality was cracking. "Thank you for coming, Father. I know you think I'm a hysterical woman. I have found that hysteria is often a rational response to the irrational," Anselm replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Show me." She led him to a back room in the school, a place that had once been used for art projects. On a long table, under a cloth, was her collection. She pulled the cloth away, and Anselm felt a physical jolt. Seeing the effigies in person was a different order of horror. The detail was staggering. One figure, representing the pub owner, had a tiny, perfectly crafted clay bottle in its hand. Another, of the local mechanic, had hands stained with real engine grease. They were portraits in mud and malice. "The children don't remember making them," Ilara explained, her voice hushed. "Or they claim they don't. They say they were just playing, and then the figures were there. It's like a fugue state. They gather by the river bank, in a copse of old, twisted oaks. They call it the making place. And the deaths." She recounted them with a grim, factual tone. "The farmer, Bill Hapwell, leg severed. Agnes Miller, the quarry fall. A third, a fisherman found drowned, his lungs full of river water. His son had made a figure with a mouth stuffed with wet moss. The correlation is 100%, Father. And it's accelerating." As they spoke, Anselm saw them, the children. They had gathered at the schoolhouse window, their small, pale faces pressed against the glass. Their eyes were not the bright, curious eyes of youth. They were old, watchful, and deeply vacant. They were like a single organism, a hive mind observing an intruder. At the center of the group was a little girl with hair the color of wheat and eyes the color of a winter sky. Lily. She held his gaze without blinking, and in her hands, she casually molded a lump of dark, wet clay. A disgraced priest must defeat an ancient god that is using children's play as a blueprint for murder before their final game ends the world. The local constable, a man named Evans, was dismissive. "Tragic accidents, Father. Nothing more. A bit of morbid imagination from the children, that's all. This isn't the city. We don't have your sort of problems here." The village vicar, a kindly, ineffectual man named Peters, was equally unhelpful. He had tried to bless the children, the river, the oak grove. Nothing had changed. His God, it seemed, held no sway here. Anselm knew that to fight a god, you must first know its name. He sought out Mrs. Havisham, the village elder, who lived in a stone cottage on the edge of the woods, so covered in ivy it seemed to be a natural outcropping of the land itself. She was a wizened, sharp-eyed woman who smelled of dried herbs and earth. Her parlor was a museum of the valley's history, filled with artifacts and yellowed maps. "You're the one from the city," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "The one who pokes at old bones. You'll find more than you bargained for here." "What are the children playing at, Mrs. Havisham?" Anselm asked, dispensing with pleasantries. She smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "They are feeding the taker of small sorrows. The eater of little fears. It has many names, from many times. The Romans who passed through here called it Minutus Timer. The Celts before them had another name. It has always been here, in the stones, in the water, in the deep, dark places of the wood. It is a god of tiny, specific horrors. It does not cause plagues or floods. It prefers a single, sharp, personal terror. A broken bone. A drowning. A fall." Anselm's mind raced, cross-referencing with his vast mental library. Miniatus Timer. The name was in a fragmentary scroll, a footnote about localized, household spirits that could turn vengeful. How does one stop it? You don't stop a stream from flowing, she chuckled darkly. You can only divert it. It was content for centuries with the small fears of mice and birds, the minor tragedies of the forest. But then we came. We built our homes. We gave it our children. Children's fears are so much more creative. Their imaginations are pure, unadulterated fuel. And their play is a form of worship it understands perfectly. The effigies are its prayers and its sacrifices. The children imagine a fate, and the God makes it real. It's a simple transaction. They give it attention, and it gives their imagination consequence. A child's greatest wish, after all, is for their play to be real. This one answers that wish in the most terrible way imaginable. The next death confirmed everything. It was the pub owner, Tom Gable. He was found behind his bar, his throat swollen shut. The coroner would later say it was a rare, acute allergic reaction, though he couldn't identify the allergen. But Ilara knew. She had confiscated an effigy of Tom just that morning from a quiet boy named Sam. The clay figure had a sliver of what looked like peanut shell pressed into its throat. Tom had had a severe peanut allergy. Sam, when questioned, just blinked and said, "I was just playing a game." The man couldn't breathe. It was funny. Anselm and Ilara stood at the edge of the oak grove, the making place. The air was thick and cold, several degrees chillier than the surrounding area. The ground was littered with the detritus of the children's play, bits of string, feathers, bones of small animals, and everywhere, the smears of grey river clay. The trees themselves seemed to twist in agonized poses. "It's learning from them," Anselm murmured, his breath misting in the air. "It's not just granting their wishes. It's absorbing their knowledge, their understanding of the world's mechanics." Sam knew about Tom's allergy. The god didn't just choke him, it used a specific, worldly mechanism. It's becoming more sophisticated, more integrated with our reality. He began a frantic, desperate research process, using the satellite internet connection at the school. He cross-referenced Mrs. Havisham's names with his own archives, which he had digitized and encrypted. He found references to an entity known as Parvus Paver, a spirit said to be conjured by the unconscious wills of the young and the pure. It was considered a nuisance, a trickster, but never a world-ender. But the texts held a warning: beware its feast. For in a congregation of young souls, its power may swell beyond the petty, and its play may turn to the shaping of empires or their dust. A congregation. The entire child population of Havenhurst was a single, powerful congregation. The children were no longer individuals, they were the cells of a single nervous system, and the god was the brain. Their play was a complex, unconscious ritual, a grammar of clay and blood that Anselm was only beginning to decipher. He realized with dawning horror that the individual effigies were just practice. The larger, more abstract idol he'd seen in the photo, the one made of thorns and glass, was the key. The children, guided by the god, were building a new body for it. A permanent vessel. And when that was complete, its power would no longer be confined to this valley. It would be unleashed upon the world, with every child a potential high priest, and every playground a potential altar. The crisis escalated when Lily, the ringleader, went missing. So did 6 other children. Panic gripped the village. Constable Evans was finally forced to take it seriously, organizing search parties. But Anselm knew where they were. He had deciphered enough. The final ritual, the completion of the idol, required a specific, potent fear, the fear of a child confronted with the ultimate consequence of their play. "They've taken Leo," Ilara gasped, bursting into the cottage where Anselm was working. Leo was her nephew, a sweet, shy boy who had resisted the compulsion longer than the others, but had finally succumbed a week prior. Anselm's blood went cold. "Here's the final piece. The god needs a core, a heart for its new body. It needs a sacrifice born of its own power. It's creating a paradox, a death caused by its own existence, which will cement it permanently into our reality." They ran through the woods, ignoring the calls of the search parties, guided by an instinct Anselm didn't know he possessed. The pull of the entity was a physical force now, a magnetic dread drawing them towards the heart of the grove. They found them in a clearing they had not seen before. The 7 children stood in a circle, their faces serene and blank. In the center, the thorn and glass idol had grown. It was now the size of a small man, a writhing, jagged sculpture of pure malevolence. At its base, tied with vines, was Leo. He was crying, terrified. Lily stood before him, a long, sharp shard of obsidian-like stone in her hand. It was not a tool from the valley. It had been made by the god. "The play must be real," Lily chanted, her voice a hollow echo. The other children joined in, a monotone chorus. "The taker must have a home. The fear must have a face." Anselm stepped into the clearing. "Lily! Stop this!" The children's heads turned in unison. The air hummed with power. Anselm felt a pressure in his skull, a psychic wave trying to force him out, to make him see nothing but empty woods. "You don't have to do this!" Ilara screamed, rushing towards Leo. Lily smiled, a terrible, ancient smile. "But we do. It's the best game. The final game." Anselm knew that holy water and crucifixes were useless. This was not a demon. It was a god, and it operated on a different logic. You could not command it, you could only break its contract. You had to disrupt the ritual, the play, at its most fundamental level. He didn't approach the idol. He didn't look at Leo. He walked right up to Lily and knelt before her, meeting her vacant gaze. "The game is broken, Lily," he said, his voice calm, forceful. She blinked. The chanting faltered. "What?" "The game. It's no fun anymore. It's too easy." Anselm's mind was racing, building a new narrative, a counter-ritual. He's just tied up. He's already scared. There's no challenge. A real game, a better game, would be to see if your god can protect you from me. He reached out and snatched the obsidian shard from her hand. The moment his skin touched it, a jolt of pure, ice-cold malice shot up his arm. He saw visions of endless, small, personal hells, 1,000 broken bones, 1,000,000 stifled breaths. He saw Sophia, his failure, her face accusing him. "You are just feeding it another fear." He gritted his teeth, embracing the pain, the fear. He was not a priest fighting a demon, he was a scholar presenting a superior thesis. He turned from Lily and, with all his strength, drove the shard not into the idol, but into the earth at its base. "This is my play," he roared into the humming silence. "I make a new rule. The god is vulnerable. Its power is rooted here, and I have pierced its root." It was a bluff, a piece of pure, theatrical nonsense. But it was a narrative. And for an entity that fed on narrative, it was a potent virus. The idol shuddered. The children gasped as one, stumbling back as if waking from a dream. The hive mind was fractured. "No!" Lily screamed, but it was her voice now, a little girl's voice, full of confusion and terror. Anselm pressed his advantage. He began to kick at the idol, not with the fury of an exorcist, but with the petulant destruction of a child ruining another's toy. "I break your toy. My game is better. My game is that your God is weak. My game is that it's afraid of me." He was speaking the God's own language. The grammar of play. Of dominance. The entity, Minutus Timer, was a bully that fed on the fears of the small. It had never been confronted by a will that refused to be afraid, that instead mocked it, that tried to outplay it. The thorn and glass form began to crack. A high-pitched, grating shriek, like the sound of 1,000,000 insects dying, filled the clearing. The air pressure dropped suddenly, and then exploded outwards in a silent, psychic shock wave. The children were knocked off their feet. The idol shattered into inert dust and fragments. Silence. True, natural silence, followed by the sound of the wind in the trees, and then, the tentative cry of a bird. The spell was broken. Chapter 7, The Lingering Echo. The aftermath was a blur of tears, confusion, and reunions. Leah was safe in Ilara's arms. The other children were crying, bewildered, with no memory of the previous weeks. The village, though scarred, began the long process of healing. The official story would remain one of mass hysteria and a tragic series of accidents. Father Anselm stood once more in his dusty study in the city. The rain still fell, but it felt different. Lighter. On his desk lay a small, innocuous lump of dried river clay. A souvenir from Havenhurst. He had not been able to save Sophia. He could not reclaim his old life or his shattered faith. But he had faced the God of little horrors, and he had won not with faith, but with understanding. He knew Minutus Timer was not destroyed. A god like that could never be destroyed, only forgotten again, forced back into the cracks of the world. It was still out there, in the shadows of playgrounds, in the dark under beds, in the small, unspoken fears of every child. It was waiting for its congregation to gather once more, for the play to begin again. But for now, the valley was quiet. And as Anselm looked out at the city, at the thousands of windows behind which children slept, he made a silent vow. He would continue his work. Because he knew, with a certainty that was both terrible and comforting, that the world was still full of little gods, hungry for play. And someone had to know the rules of their games.